No one saw the end of the most talked about marriage coming. From the outside, people admired their union. Association of tappers tapped into their home without even knowing what they were tapping into because Cheta and Gozie were practically living like housemates. The only thing they shared psychologically was the roof. Even good morning greeting was a problem simply because the man was secretly seeing one Jezebel outside and was comparing her body structure with that of his wife and mother of two children. But still, Cheta was hopeful. The month Cheta's mother died, her world shook in ways she never imagined. Her mother wasn't just family. She was her refuge, the one person she could call without explaining herself, and the one person who prayed for her marriage even when things were hard. And then, suddenly, life happened. She was gone. As burial preparations began, Cheta did what any married woman would do. She went to her husband, not to beg for anything because she was doing so well for herself, but to ask about his plans concerning her late mother's burial. His response was short and empty. I have no plan, no sympathy, no follow-up, and no concern. That single sentence said more than 1,000 insults ever could. She waited, hoping he would add something. Maybe he would ask how much was needed and maybe he would show concern, but he didn't. He simply returned to whatever was occupying his attention. That was the moment the marriage truly began to crack. From that day, she stopped expecting anything from him. She continued the burial preparations with her siblings. She didn't ask her husband for money and she didn't complain. She contributed her quota and covered up with her husband's name. 4 days to the burial, she informed her husband that she would be traveling to the village with the children. He gave his permission without hesitation. Before leaving, she asked one final question. Will you be coming to the village to pay your last respects? He didn't say yes and he didn't say no. He just kept quiet. The next morning, she traveled with the children. Throughout the journey, she kept checking her phone. No message and no missed call to check up on them. Still, she held on to hope, as hope has a way of blinding people who are not ready to accept the truth. A day before the burial, she tried calling him again. This time, his line didn't go through. Her heart sank. On the burial day, relatives and villagers kept asking after him. Where is your husband? When will he arrive? He's supposed to be here to play his in-law role. Each time, she smiled weakly and lied. He's on his way. He repeated that lie until night fell, but he never came. That night after the burial activities ended and the house grew quiet, she broke down. The tears came uncontrollably, not just for her mother, but for a marriage she could feel slipping through her fingers. Her sister noticed and tried to comfort her. She advised her not to confront her husband immediately when she returned to Lagos, but to first find out why he didn't show up. By morning, Cheta's mind was made up. Her husband had not called and his phone was unreachable. She felt something was wrong, so she decided to return to Lagos immediately. What she didn't know was that she was walking straight into a discovery that would shatter every remaining illusion she still had about her marriage. The journey back to Lagos felt longer than usual. Cheta barely spoke throughout the trip. Her children slept on and off, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. Her phone remained silent. No calls and no messages. The uneasy feeling in her chest refused to leave. When she finally arrived at their compound, the first thing she noticed was the silence. There was no sign that anyone had been home recently. She greeted a neighbor weakly and dragged her bags towards the door. As she searched for her house key inside her bag, she tried to calm herself. Maybe he stepped out, or maybe he traveled suddenly. She unlocked the door and pushed it open. What greeted her made her heart skip violently. The sitting room was empty. EMPTY. No chairs, no television, no center table, no curtains, and nothing. For a few seconds, her brain refused to process what her eyes were seeing. She stood there frozen, convinced it had to be a mistake. Maybe she was in the wrong apartment, or maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on her. Her children asked, "Mommy, what happened?" That question made the bag slip from her hands and hit the floor. She rushed into the bedroom. The bed was still there. A small bedside fridge remained, but everything else was gone. That was when reality hit her fully. Her husband had moved out. She grabbed her phone and began calling him repeatedly, but the calls didn't go through. Panic took over. Her breathing became heavy and her hands shook as she stepped out of the apartment, hoping that someone could explain what was happening. As she stood in the corridor, her landlady stepped out onto the balcony above, enjoying the evening breeze. She looked up and greeted her politely. "Good evening, ma." The landlady responded warmly and asked about her trip. Cheta forced a smile, replied, and then asked the question burning inside her. "Please, ma, I just got home and met our apartment empty. Did you notice anything unusual?" The landlady paused. "Ah, I thought we were aware." Oh. The woman's heart dropped. "Aware of what, ma?" "Well, we saw your husband 2 days ago. He came here with a bus. They packed chairs, TV and other things from the house." The words hit her like blows. She nodded slowly, thanked the landlady and walked back into the apartment like someone moving underwater. Inside the empty sitting room, she sat on the floor and cried. She had not even healed from her mother's demise, and nowadays, that night, she barely slept. The next morning, after another round of trying to call him, she made a decision. If her husband would not explain himself, then his parents would. She dressed the children and went straight to her father-in-law's house. She greeted them respectfully and explained everything, from the burial preparations to her return and then the empty house. She expected shock, anger, or even confusion. But children of God, she got none of that. Instead, they looked at her calmly, almost prepared. Her mother-in-law spoke first. "Yes, we know he packed out. You are no longer our wife. He's with another woman now, and that is the woman we recognize." The words cut deep. Cheta managed to ask, "For how long, ma?" "Since the day you served him divorce papers," her father-in-law replied. She broke down immediately. She explained that the divorce letter was sent out of frustration, not intention. She reminded them how she had been treated during her second child's omugo. Slapped, humiliated, accused unjustly, and her husband didn't speak up for her. She explained that all she wanted was protection, support, and a husband who would stand up for her. She said she used the divorce paper as a reverse psychology. They listened without emotion. Then they dismissed her. "We have nothing else to say. He has made his decision and that's final." That was the day she truly became alone. She left the house in tears, carrying not just heartbreak but rejection. When she returned to her empty apartment, the silence felt heavier than before, but life did not pause for her pain. She wiped her tears, gathered herself, and she began to survive. She cried for days, quietly behind closed doors when the children were asleep. But when money came, she wiped her face and stepped out to face life. She threw herself into her business. Some days she sold well. Some other days she returned home with almost nothing. But every day she made sure her children ate. Months passed, then reality knocked again. Her house rent expired. She refused to renew the rent because she didn't want someone crawling back after she had suffered to take care of the children. She got another apartment somewhere and began pushing. One evening, as she was returning from work, she ran into a former neighbor. They exchanged greetings. He noticed the tiredness in her eyes and asked how she was doing. Then he asked a simple question. "I haven't seen your husband in a long while, even before you packed out. Is he okay?" That question opened a door she had been holding shut. She told him everything, from the burial to the empty house and then to the rejection by her in-laws. The neighbor listened carefully, shaking his head occasionally. When she finished, he asked for her husband's number. He wanted to speak to him, man to man. Later that night, the man called Gozie. Gozie sounded relaxed, even happy. The neighbor spoke calmly, advising him to let go of pride and think about his children. He explained that the divorce letter was written in anger, not intention. He reminded him that people react to hurt differently and no one knows how he or she can actually handle a mess until they have been severely hurt. The husband listened and then replied coldly, "Leave that woman for now, sir. I want to teach her a lesson." That sentence sealed everything. When the call ended, the neighbor knew Gozie had made a dangerous choice, a choice fueled by ego, and he knew he was headed for doom. Meanwhile, Cheta continued her life. She focused on today because tomorrow felt too uncertain, and we all know that life has a way of waiting patiently. It doesn't rush to punish people. It doesn't argue. It doesn't threaten. It simply watches quietly until the moment a person is most unprepared. For Gozie, life had been unusually peaceful after he walked away. He moved in with the other woman confidently as though he had escaped a prison. His phone buzzed with laughter instead of responsibility. No crying children, no rent worries, and she was not asking plenty of questions, quotes and unquotes. In his mind, he has finally met his peace of mind. When his friends tried to caution him, he brushed them aside. When elders hinted at reconciliation, he avoided them. And when his pastor called, he stopped picking his calls. He told himself he was teaching his wife a serious lesson. Months later, news came from the village. There was going to be a major family gathering in town. It was one of those traditional events that required presence. Elders would attend, extended relatives would gather, and absence would be noticed. The man's parents, Gozie's parents, insisted they all go together. He agreed. Not because he suddenly missed his family, but because appearances mattered and he needed to show them that everything was fine and at the same time he was still in control of his life. The journey began early in the morning. The road was long. The weather was uncertain and the vehicle was filled with voices. His parents sat behind him discussing family matters. He barely listened because his mind drifted between phone messages and thoughts of the life he believed he had upgraded to. They arrived safely, attended the function, exchanged greetings, and returned the same day. It was on the journey back that everything changed. Night had begun to fall. The road was darker than usual. The headlights cut through the darkness in narrow beams. The driver slowed down occasionally to avoid potholes, then sped up again to make up for lost time. No one sensed danger. No one prayed extra prayers, and no one knew the road was hungry and had already decided. It happened suddenly. There was a long bang, a sharp screech, then chaos. Metal crushed metal. Glass chattered and voices screamed. The vehicle lost control and somersaulted violently before landing in a twisted heap by the roadside. Then silence followed, the kind of silence that comes after something irreversible. People rushed from nearby houses. Torches flashed and shouts filled the air. Two bodies were pulled at first, lifeless. The man's parents, Gozie's parents, had died instantly. When they reached him, he was still breathing but barely. Blood soaked his clothes. One leg was twisted unnaturally. His face was swollen and pain robbed him of consciousness repeatedly. An ambulance arrived late as usual. By the time they reached the hospital, doctors shook their heads quietly. Emergency procedures began. Wounds were cleaned, blood was transfused, and fractures were examined. He survived, but that survival came at a cost. He could not walk and he could barely move. Pain became his constant companion. The hospital contacted family members. Eventually, the woman he was living with arrived. At first, she acted concerned. She signed papers, she paid bills, and she answered questions. But as the days passed, the truth revealed itself. The bills kept on increasing. The recovery was slow and the care required was intense. Suddenly, she just hated him, and 3 days later she stopped coming. The nurses whispered among themselves. The doctors frowned because hospital bills piled up at the counter. Eventually, the hospital management approached him and said, "We will have to suspend treatment if your bills are not cleared, sir." He looked around helplessly. They asked a simple question. "Who again can we call from your family?" For the first time since the accident, tears rolled freely down his face. His voice broke as he answered, "The mother of my children." He gave them Cheta's number and the nurse called. When Cheta picked up, the nurse introduced the hospital and explained the situation. Her response was cold. "Madam Nurse, please, don't remind me of my predicament. My husband is dead and buried." "No! Who gave you that wrong information? Your husband is very much alive, just that we need you to come take care of him because he is lonely here. I am not too sure it's good for his condition." Cheta just dropped the call. The nurse tried again. This time, Cheta ended the call and blocked the number. Gosia turned his face to the wall and cried. He realized that the woman he abandoned had truly moved on. He begged the hospital to call one of his parents. They reminded him gently, "Ogasa, your parents are deceased." That was when reality crushed him completely. With a weak voice, he asked them to call that his neighbor that called months ago. Probably he can help reconcile him and his wife. Within minutes, he came, and as Gosia saw him, he whispered through tears, "You were right, sir. My wife will be the only friend in the days of adversity, but I have failed woefully. Please, can you help me talk to her?" The man told him, "Hold her." "No, I don't have such grace. You will paddle your canoe by yourself. The only thing I can do for you is to pray for speedy recovery so that you can do the talking by yourself. Because when an elderly person advises you young men of these days, you will say you know it all." He prayed, gave him money and left. And then the hospital room became Gosia's entire world. Days blended into nights, and the nights dragged into long restless hours filled with pain, regret, and unanswered questions. Machines beeped beside him, reminding him that he was still alive, but everything that once gave his life meaning has slipped beyond his reach. The nurses came and went. Some were kind, some were tired. All of them were professional, but professionalism could not replace his family. It could not hold his hand at night or speak words of comfort when fear crept in. His bills remained unpaid. Every morning, hospital staff stopped by his bed to remind him, politely at first, then firmly, that his account was still outstanding. Treatment was slowed. Some medications were withheld and physiotherapy sections were postponed. Pain became sharper. He lay there staring at the space, replaying his choices like a broken record. He remembered the day he packed out, how powerful he felt and how justified. He remembered telling his friends that he needed to teach his wife a very bitter lesson. He remembered how confident he was that she would eventually beg. Now, he could barely lift his hand. The woman he ran to had closed his chapter and disappeared. The parents who encouraged his decision were gone forever. The woman he wanted to show Pepe was living a different kind of life. Although not an easy one, but a purposeful life. Her business had grown, not because luck favored her, but because necessity forced her to be disciplined. Her children adapted quickly. They asked fewer questions as time passed. They learned new routines and they learned strength by watching their mother stand tall even when she was tired. The most painful thing in all of this was that he offended her. Instead of apologizing, he chose to act like the victim. If she wasn't a strong woman, she would have died. She forgave him for herself, not because he deserves it. And then she totally forgot about his existence. Back at the hospital, things took a darker turn. The hospital management informed him that if payment was not made, he would be discharged, regardless of his condition, as they could no longer carry the burden. That word discharge echoed painfully in his mind. Discharged to where and to whom? He had no home that would receive him, no wife to care for him, and no parents to advocate for him. His pride finally collapsed. He began calling people. Some didn't pick, some promised to call back and never did, and some offered sympathy but no help. One friend visited once. He stood awkwardly by the bed, said a few encouraging words, dropped a small amount of money and left quickly, clearly uncomfortable with the reality before him. The room felt colder after that. That night, alone and exhausted, he cried again. This time, he cried with the rawness of a man who finally understood the weight of his actions. He cried for the wife he failed to protect. He cried for the children he abandoned emotionally long before he abandoned them physically. And most of all, he cried because he finally realized painfully that love is not proven when things are easy. It is proven when things fall apart. Days later, he called his former neighbor again, and when the man came, he narrated his ordeal to him and turned his face away in shame. The neighbor said nothing for a long moment. Then after a long while, he paid the hospital bill and then said, "A man who abandons his home during peace should not be surprised when he has nowhere to return during war." Those words stayed with him long after the neighbor left. He then realized the truth in the hardest way possible, that strength is temporal, pride is expensive, and that the people you neglect today may be the only ones capable of saving you tomorrow. He started regretting his actions big time. He was even choosing to join his parents because he didn't know where and how to meet his wife and apologize. And also, he had never imagined his life would narrow down to a bed, a bill, and a list of people who no longer answered his calls. 2 months later, the hospital discharged him. A wheelchair was arranged. His few belongings were packed into a small bag. A nurse handed him a list of medications he will have to continue for the rest of his life and wished him well with professional politeness. He called his neighbor again. He came and reluctantly took him in. After a week, the unspoken frustration became obvious because care is easy when it's voluntary but becomes a burden when it is forced. He started coming home late. Meals became irregular. Complaints surfaced. Subtle at first, then it became obvious. "This thing is not easy," he muttered one evening. "But I'm not your family now. I have tried my best. You just need to go live with your family. I am too young to carry this load." In all of this, Cheta continued her life. She had heard rumors, nothing detailed, just whispers, and she was not interested. Not because she was heartless, but because reopening that door would cost her her mind and emotions. Days later, Gozie was taken to a cousin's place and immediately he felt lost. He wished he had not packed out and he wished he had treated his wife well when her mother died, but it was already too late. For so long, he believed that as long as he was physically able, financially stable, and emotionally distant, he was untouchable. But life had redefined that. Months passed. The fractures healed and the pain reduced, but what never healed was the loneliness. His cousin's house no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a reminder that he was out of place. So one evening, after an argument over something small and something insignificant, he decided to move out. His cousin respected that since he was much better. He moved to his parents' house and stayed alone. One afternoon, as he sat by the window watching people pass, he whispered words he wished he had said earlier to himself. I was strong, but I was not wise. He tried to call his wife, but she had matched his energy by blocking his line. Till today, he's still looking for a way to reach out to Cheta for reconciliation, but Cheta on her part is not ready, simply because to her, Gozie is dead and buried. She had buried her mother, she had buried the so-called marriage, and she had also buried the version of herself that begged for love where there was none. Hey, African Tales by Kamma Tribe, how are you all doing? For me, I am doing just fine. I hope you learned one or two things from the story. Please, before I leave here today, permit me to say this. Marriage is not sustained by power, pride, or outsiders cheering you on. It is sustained by protection, responsibility, and presence. Do not wait, dear married people, until sickness, old age, or loss humbles you before you learn humility, because some lessons, when learned late, come with permanent consequences. Pride over peace in marriage may give you temporal control, but it can destroy generations. If you are still strong today, treat your spouse very well, because tomorrow is not promised and strength does not last forever. Such relationships are seasonal and marriage is meant to be covenantal. So make your choice as the ball is in your court. The Bible clearly says in Deuteronomy chapter 30 and verse 19, I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore, choose life that both you and your seed may live. May God help every one of us to choose life. In Jesus' name, amen. Let me even ask you, do you think Cheta will ever return to this marriage? And do you think pride ruins more marriages than infidelity? Finally, have you seen a situation where advice from family destroyed a home? Kindly drop your thoughts with me in the comment section. Don't forget to give the story a thumbs up, share out to your loved ones, and if you have not subscribed to this channel, what are you waiting for? Punch on that subscribe button so that you can join the Kamma Tribe free of charge. And until I bring the next story your way, it's a goodbye from here, and God bless you.